All right, everybody here, you heard the term culture of philanthropy. Who here has heard that or used that term in your organization? So some, not all. It's a really common refrain that you hear among fund development professionals. In fact, a Google search, now I didn't come up with 9 million hits, but I did a Google search of a culture of philanthropy and came up with about 500,000 hits. Most of them consultants wanting to teach us how to create a culture of philanthropy in our organizations. And it's really makes sense why that desire is there. Okay, first off, fund development professionals, it's not realistic to expect them to raise all of the monies that our organizations need to survive. I know that sounds strange to say, but consider this. A fund development director, their average stay, according to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, it's 16 months. So you're relying on someone to get fully informed about your organization, to go out, to meet with donors, to communicate what your mission is. And in 16 months, you're doing it over again. And for organizations that have that type of turnover, you're talking about an expense of around $125,000 to the organization in lost revenue every time you turn that position over. So obviously, the idea of a culture of philanthropy, which is defined as everybody in the organization having a role in development, everybody from the person answering the phone to the person that goes out and does direct services to the chairman of the board, they all are building relationships. And it's through those relationships then that we are able to raise more money and to sustain and grow our operations. So that's kind of the idea. It's a donor-centric model when people say culture of philanthropy. So what it is kind of is the proverbial pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And the reason why I use that analogy is because that pot of gold really, it's elusive. It's really not that attainable. I have yet to see an organization personally, although I've read about them, where there truly is a culture of philanthropy within that organization. And if you're not careful, what you'll find at the end of the rainbow may not be a pot of gold at all, right? So I want to give you an example kind of how I used to do this in my development work. I worked for 20 years with Kansas Big Brothers Big Sisters, and in a variety of development responsibilities. And basically, I would talk to staff, anyone that would talk to me about it, about the need for a culture of philanthropy, right? And I would give stories, and a lot of times these stories would be about how we don't have it or how we need to build it. And so one story in particular, and it's a true story, I came into the office early, about 7:30, and I was surprised to see the light in the conference room on. And so I peeked in there, and there's a case manager meeting with a volunteer. Now that's not too unusual, because part of a case manager's job is to work with volunteers at a time that's convenient for them. So they were doing a before work meeting. But as I looked closer, I recognized the volunteer. That volunteer was a donor, and it was a prospective donor, a bank president, somebody that I had tried to get an appointment with for literally months and had not been able to get in the door. And so as my example would go, that's showing that we don't have a culture of philanthropy. That case manager has a role in development, not to raise funds, not to ask that donor for dollars, but to come to me and let me know that that appointment's there so I can greet the donor, or at the least bring the donor by or the prospective donor by my office after their visit's complete. Well, when I'm saying that to staff, even if my intentions are totally noble, what they begin to hear is that you need me to make your job easier. Because it's donor-centric, right? So everything, the donor trumps all else when you start talking about a culture of philanthropy. And so you begin to create the very silos that a culture of philanthropy is supposed to break down. So what I would propose is that instead of focusing on a culture of philanthropy, that we start talking about programs. You know, a cultural program maybe doesn't work, but a focus on our mission, a focus on connectedness, a focus on a culture of collaboration where we collaborate internally. We're all part of everything. And this is especially something that's needed on the fund development side. And I'll give you some examples. You know, we've heard from several speakers today about the change that's happening in the landscape of our funders, of our donors, and especially with foundations. They're getting more and more sophisticated, they're narrowing their focus, and they're expecting outcomes that are frankly not reasonable. And in order to meet those outcomes, you need to be able to speak the language, because what's happening is foundations and even individual donors now, they are understanding programs. Foundation staff are hiring program staff that just focus on the area of outcomes that are of interest to that foundation. So you need development staff who can talk the talk and walk the walk, so to speak. So the first thing you can do is think about that when you're hiring people. When you're out there and you have an opening and you're bringing someone into your fund development position, think about someone and look for someone who has some direct service experience, somebody who has a passion for your mission, somebody who either is involved with your program or has a real interest in becoming involved in your program, who will become a volunteer, who will go out and hear stories from clients, who will talk to and learn about the staff that are doing the service delivery. The second thing we need to do, I'm just going to take that off for a minute. The second thing we need to do is break down those silos. We need to have ways of communicating with each other from the program side and the fund development side, so that those silos, they're going to exist. I mean, I'm from Kansas. I know silos have a purpose, right? Silos have a purpose. They're going to exist. But you need to be able to ventilate them. We need to be able to bridge them. You need to be able to connect from one silo to the other. And to do that, it's really pretty simple. But it takes a lot of communication. It takes connection, and it takes intentional thought. So one way you can do that is you have a team that you put together on anything that you're doing related to fund development. So if you're working with the foundation, rather than have the fund development staff write the proposal, run it by the program director, and then submit that proposal, which is kind of standard operation in most organizations, bring a team together that consists of direct service case managers or whatever your direct service staff are, and includes other program staff, fund development staff, so that it's more inclusive of the entire organization. And get input from them, not just on the program design, but is this realistic? Or are we putting things in here that we just can't do? I know no one here has ever done that, but you don't want to be in a position where you have a grant that's promising outcomes that cost $500,000 and it's a $50,000 grant, right? So you want to make sure that you are getting input from them, not only at the beginning, but as a final read before you submit that. And then you're also getting their input after the fact, talking about how are we going to execute this. And when you do the handoff, so that program is executing what they said they would do in the graph or in the grant, you're communicating. It's back and forth again, and you're talking about outcomes, because again, it's all about outcomes with funders. And outcomes are a fund development responsibility, and outcomes are a program responsibility. Yet all too often, they land in just one or the other, or neither, and we're not able to communicate those results to funders. I will say real quickly also, this applies to individual giving as well. Major donors are getting more and more sophisticated. There are so many sources out there that they can go to. They hire consultants, and they tend to already believe in your mission. They may even volunteer for your organization. They're aware of it. And so they too need to be communicated to, need to be shown the outcomes that their dollar is going to help you produce. So it's all about justifying and showing those outcomes. Another thing that you need to make sure your organization is capable of doing is working collaboratively outside of the organization, and also looking at your internal structure, so that you're in a better position to respond to the shifts and the changes that we see in fund development right now. So, for example, Gordon was talking this morning a little bit about social impact bonds. There is no way we could work on a social impact bond with a standard organizational structure that has a fund development director, a program director, a finance director, and so forth. You need to look at the structures of your organization and see, are you structured in a way that allows you to communicate to the funders and to show to the funders the results that they're expecting to see. And part of that means you need to be able to differentiate your outcomes. And mentoring, I know not everybody here is in the mentoring field, but mentoring is a good example of what differentiating outcomes means, because in mentoring, it impacts a bunch of things a little bit. So we know that mentoring helps with academics, but it's not the magic bullet to get a child to graduate. We know that it helps and is a great support when you're talking about workforce development. But we would be silly to think that somebody would just fund a mentoring program and you're going to see workforce development type outcomes. Right, so you want to be able to differentiate those outcomes. And what we've done at Big Brothers Big Sisters to help do that on a national scope is we pulled together a team that we call RIG. It's Research, Innovation, and Growth. And it's really a representation of that blend of program staff and fund development staff that I talked about earlier. So you have experts in fund development, experts in research, experts in program, but then we're also pulling others in through team meetings, through collaborative meetings. We're pulling in others from the field, from other Big Brother Big Sister agencies. We're pulling in other Big Brother Big Sister of America staff. And we're pulling in partners and prospective partners to talk about how can we move the needle for these specific outcomes that funders are looking to address, and outcomes, incidentally, that we know mentoring can produce when it's a complement to other programming. So I'm going to bring it back to that story I talked about with the donor. See, when you have silos, and you start to communicate, and you start to connect, and you start to collaborate, you can work across the silos. And with that donor I was talking about, we did wind up having him attend the fundraiser. His bank sponsored it at a major level. And what happened there was so simple yet magical. The case manager came to the fundraiser, not to raise money, although we probably did put her to work, but to do her job. She was able there to connect with that volunteer and to give him feedback about the little brother that he was mentoring. And they talked about his school and some issues that he had in school and some areas he was improving and the plans for the summer. But we also talked about the donor. We talked about his family, about the new campaign that the bank was doing to promote its, I don't even remember what it was, but its new CD or you know, obviously when you meet with the funder, you're more aware of what it is they're doing when you talk to them. But the point there being, we were just communicating, we were connecting, we were all uniting for a common purpose, for a common goal that we had. And that really is what a culture of philanthropy strives to obtain. So, thank you.
Thank you.